Every entrepreneur begins with an idea, a vision of what could be built, a problem that can be solved, a need that could be met. It exists only in the mind of the founder. Then we begin giving it structure. We clarify our vision. We define our mission. We identify our core values and what will guide our decisions. We develop a strategy. We begin building the people skills, the systems, the resources needed to move our mission forward. But in the beginning, almost nothing moves easily. There's no established momentum. There may be little money, just a few customers, if any. There may be no audience waiting for what we've created. Every meaningful step requires effort. This is where Jim Collins' book gives us one of the most helpful pictures from his book called Good to Great. He calls it the flywheel effect. Imagine an enormous heavy metal wheel. At first, the wheel is completely still. We place our hands against it and we push. It barely moves. Push again. The movement is almost impossible to see. We make another call. We develop another product. We serve another customer. We improve another system. We publish another message. We have another conversation. Each individual action may seem small. None of them appear powerful enough to transform our organization. We continue pushing in a clear and consistent direction. One faithful step follows another. Gradually, the wheel completes its first rotation, then another, then another. Visible results begin to appear. Those results create confidence, and our confidence creates greater commitment. Commitment produces more disciplined action, and disciplined action creates momentum. And eventually, the flywheel begins turning faster than any single push could have produced on its own. This is the flywheel effect. It is the cumulative power of many consistent actions working together over time. This is what we hope will happen when we launch a business or a ministry or a movement or a meaningful new project. We build the vision, we clarify the mission, we establish our values, we develop our plan, then we begin pushing. At first, progress may seem painfully slow, but then something begins to happen. People respond, customers arrive, opportunity opens, revenue begins to grow, the message begins to spread. The mission is no longer merely an idea. The mission is moving, and the movement can be exciting. Movement can make the future feel possible. Momentum confirms that our work is producing results. Momentum encourages us to keep going. But here's the question we must face. What happens when the flywheel suddenly hits a wall? When COVID happens? What happens when progress stops? What happens when the resources begin to disappear? What happens when the strategy fails? When the opportunity closes? Or the season becomes harder than we imagined? What happens when the wheel that once seemed unstoppable refuses to move? That is when leadership becomes real. As the leaders of our vision, we discover whether our vision is sustained only by visible progress or anchored in something deeper. Momentum is powerful, but momentum is not permanent. There's a season where the wheel turns rapidly. There will also be seasons when every movement requires enormous effort. And there may be seasons when success does not mean moving the wheel forward. Success may mean refusing to abandon the mission simply because the wheel has stopped. So what do we do when the flywheel hits the wall? How do we face reality without allowing reality to destroy the vision? How do we change the plan without abandoning the calling? How do we remain faithful when success seems impossible? That's where our journey begins. Before I begin this story, I want to approach it with humility and respect. I served in the United States Marine Corps, and I'm proud to be a military veteran, but I did not serve in combat. I have never been shot down over enemy territory, and I have never been held as a prisoner of war. I have never endured the torture, isolation, hunger, and uncertainty and fear that a prisoner of war has faced. So I do not tell the story with someone who fully understands that experience, but I tell it as a veteran who stands in deep gratitude of those who endured what most of us can scarcely imagine. For those of us who have served in the military, the stories of prisoners of war are holy ground. We approach them carefully. We approach them gratefully. Admiral James Stockdale gave the world a testimony about courage, hope, and responsibility and the strength of the human spirit. On September 9th, 1965, Commander Stockdale was flying an A-4 Skyhawk over North Vietnam. He was already an experienced naval aviator, and he had flown nearly 200 combat missions. Then his aircraft was struck by enemy fire. Warning lights flashed. The aircraft began falling around him. Stockdale knew he could not bring the plane home. He pulled the ejection handle. In a matter of seconds, he went from commanding American aircraft in the sky to descending beneath a parachute over enemy territory. Below him was a village. Around him was a war. Behind him was a falling aircraft, and ahead of him was an experience that would test nearly every dimension of the human spirit. Stockdale struck the ground and was quickly surrounded. He was injured and beaten during his capture. He was taken prisoner and transported to Hanoi. He would eventually enter the prison Americans came to call the Hanoi Hilton. He would not come home for 7.5 years. More than 7 years separated from his wife and children. More than 7 years without knowing when freedom would come. There was no known release date. There was no countdown he could mark on the wall. Stockdale was the highest-ranking Navy officer being held in that prison system. That meant he was not only responsible for himself, but he carried the responsibility of the men imprisoned with him. Out of that experience came a principle that later became known as the Stockdale Paradox. It is the discipline of maintaining unwavering faith that you will ultimately prevail while confronting the most brutal facts of your present reality. Notice the two sides: unwavering faith. Also, brutal facts. Not one or the other, but both. Stockdale did not survive by pretending his circumstances were better than they really were. He did not deny the torture. He did not minimize the danger, but neither did he allow the prison to have the final word concerning who he was or what his life meant. Faith without truth becomes denial, but truth without faith becomes despair. One of the most important lessons associated with Stockdale concerns the difference between enduring hope and fragile optimism. Fragile optimism attaches hope to a particular outcome or timetable. It says the difficulty will certainly be over by Christmas. The business will certainly succeed within 6 months. This relationship will certainly be restored this year. There's nothing wrong with praying for a specific outcome or setting a goal, but when our ability to endure depends upon God following our timetable, our hope becomes fragile. Christmas comes and the prison door remains closed. Easter comes and the ordeal continues. When hope is attached only to a deadline, the passing of the deadline can feel like the death of the vision. The Stockdale Paradox does not ask us to manufacture imaginary confidence. It calls us to face reality honestly without surrendering hope. The wall may be real. The suffering may be severe. The brutal facts may be undeniable, but the wall does not get to speak the final word. In Christian terms, we confront the full truth of our present circumstances while maintaining unwavering confidence in the character, presence, purpose, and ultimate victory of God. We do not deny the facts. We place the facts inside a greater reality. God remains God. Christ remains present. Faithfulness still matters. The most faithful step still matters. The Apostle Paul lived this paradox centuries before Stockdale gave it a name. Paul did not deny reality. He had been beaten. He had been rejected. He had been shipwrecked. He had experienced hunger, danger, betrayal, and imprisonment. When Paul wrote the book of Philippians, his freedom was restricted and his future was uncertain. He did not know exactly what Caesar would decide of his fate. Paul did not call imprisonment freedom. He did not call hunger abundance. But those brutal facts did not become the whole truth about Paul. Prison was real, but Christ was also very real. The chains were real, but his God-given calling was real. And uncertainty was real, but the resurrection was also real. Paul said, I press on. Paul also said, I have learned to be content. And those statements do not contradict each other. Paul was content with Christ's provision, but he was not content with spiritual stagnation. Paul had released control of the outcome. but he had not released responsibility for his calling. Christian contentment does not say nothing can be done, so nothing matters. Christian contentment says, I cannot control the outcome, but I can remain faithful with what God has entrusted to me today. Resignation abandons responsibility. Contentment keeps building without making achievement our identity. Let me say that again. Contentment keeps building without making achievement our identity. Viktor Frankl gives us another window into this subject. Frankl was an Austrian psychiatrist, survived Nazi concentration camp. His psychological approach was built around humanity's search for meaning. Frankl argued that human beings are not driven by only pleasure or power. We possess a deep need to discover meaning and to give ourselves to something beyond ourselves. So when suffering cannot immediately be removed, a person may still choose meaningful response to that suffering. There are things man may take from us. There are things a crisis may take from us. But every severe suffering cannot sense every remaining choice. But even severe suffering cannot erase every remaining choice we have. We still can ask, what will I believe? Whom will I love? What responsibility remains mine? And we must also ask, what is my next faithful response? What can I do right now? What can I do today? What's that one thing I can do when all hope seems lost? This reveals something significant about the way God created humanity. The first description of God in the scripture presents him as a creator. God speaks, God forms, God brings order from what is formless, God fills what is empty. God creates human beings in his image. We're not creators in the same absolute sense that God is the creator, but we are created to cultivate, arrange, develop, build, imagine, bring forth possibilities from what God has placed before us. This creative capacity becomes especially important when the original plan collapses. When we hit the wall, sometimes the vision still remains the same while the strategy must change completely. Creativity alone is not enough. We also need resolve. Steel resolve is not emotional excitement. Excitement is powerful when it is present, but excitement cannot be trusted to remain through every season. Steel resolve is the settled decision that our values will remain true under pressure. It says, I will not allow suffering to turn me into something I was never called to become. I will not exchange integrity for immediate relief, and I will not destroy tomorrow in order to escape today. I may need to change the plan. I may need to rest. I may need to grieve. I may need to receive help, but I will not surrender the person God is forming in me. That's steel resolve. We must recognize that our vision is not our God. We do not worship our plans. We do not assume that every detail in our imagination came directly from God. Sometimes adversity does not merely test our vision, sometimes it purifies our vision. It separates calling from ego. It separates mission from method. It separates faith from fantasy. Steel resolve does not mean stubbornly preserving every detail of the original plan. Resolve means faithful to God while allowing him to correct our understanding. Paul had a clear mission to proclaim Christ, but the strategy changed repeatedly. Sometimes he preached publicly, sometimes he wrote letters, sometimes he discipled people inside of their home, sometimes he ministered while chained to a Roman guard. The method changed, but the mission remained. We must be careful when speaking about severe suffering. Not every season will produce an impressive visible accomplishment. Sometimes survival itself is a meaningful victory. Sometimes getting out of bed is courage. Sometimes asking for help is strength. Sometimes simply protecting our family, remaining sober, paying the next bill, caring for our body, or praying one honest prayer is the next turn of the flywheel. We read social media and people celebrate their accomplishments and how wonderful things are, and we compare ourselves to their mountaintop moment. We should not place the burden of spectacular achievement upon people who are fighting to survive. God does not despise small acts of obedience. Tiny, faithful action may preserve the possibility of a future we cannot yet see. When the flywheel hits the wall, we can follow 5 movements. First, face the facts. What is actually happening and what has changed? Second, return to the mission. Why did we begin and what assignment remains? Third, protect our core values. What kind of person must I remain under pressure? Fourth, create what remains. What resources, relationships, knowledge, and opportunities are still available? And fifth, take the next step, the next fateful step. We may not be able to see the entire road, but we can usually identify one fateful action. Make the call, write the page, tell the truth, ask for help, study the problem, pray the prayer, rest for the night, then rise up and take the next step. We can express this Stockdale Paradox in distinctly Christian language. Confront the full truth of your present circumstances, maintain unwavering confidence in the character and ultimate victory of God, remain faithful to the mission, entrust the outcome and timing to God. This does not promise that every personal dream will happen exactly as imagined, but it will promise something deeper. God will remain God, Christ will remain present, and faithfulness will remain meaningful. Character can still be formed, love can still be given, truth can still be spoken, service can still be offered. No circumstance can prevent us from taking the next faithful step available to us. We should celebrate the strength of the human spirit. God has created us with this remarkable capacity for endurance, adaptation, sacrifice, imagination, and courage. We see people endure imprisonment. We see families rebuilt after disasters. We see individuals begin after failure, addiction, grief, and financial collapse. This resilience reflects something significant about our God-given humanity. But Christian faith takes us beyond confidence in human willpower alone. Paul did not say, I have discovered the strength within myself. He said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. The power of the human spirit is real, but the human spirit was never intended to be its own God. Christian resolve is not, I am sufficient in myself. Christian resolve is, Christ is sufficient, and I will continue to respond to his grace. The success map triangle becomes especially important when we hit the wall. Vision asks, what future am I still called to believe that is possible? Core values ask, who must I remain when pressure attempts to change me? Our mission asks, what faithful work remains mine today? Our strategic plan asks, what do the brutal facts require us to change? And our development plan asks, who must I become to carry the calling through the next season? The flywheel turns around our mission. Core values align each turn. Development strengthens each turn. Strategy measures and improves each turn. Vision reminds us why the turning matters. When severe adversity comes, we may not be able to move every part at once, but we can preserve alignment. We can protect the center. We can refuse to let things spiral out of control. We can prepare for the next step that we need to take. True success is not merely turning the flywheel when momentum is strong. True success is remaining faithful when the flywheel refuses to move. True success is not pretending that brutal facts are unimportant. True success is looking directly at reality without allowing reality to become our God. True success is not forcing ourselves to feel optimistic, but true success is finding our confidence in the character and presence of Jesus Christ. True success is not refusing to change the plan, and true success is refusing to abandon the mission merely because the plan must change. True success is a human spirit created by God, strengthened by Christ, anchored in meaning, and surrendered to a calling greater than comfort. That's how we hold on to the vision. We face reality honestly. We trust Christ completely. We create with what remains. We stand upon our core values. we take the next fateful step, and even when the flywheel has hit the wall, we refuse to believe that the wall has spoken the final word. The plans may fail. The route may change. The season may become harder than we expected, but Christ has not changed. The mission may still matter. The next fateful step may still be available. So do not let delay become defeat. Do not let difficulty silence the vision. Press on. Look ahead. And live your vision. What if our dream isn't just a dream, but a map? Hi, I'm Michael. I'm the founder of Success Map. I've spent 30 years in ministry with mission organizations, learning and teaching about mission, vision, core values, development plan, strategic plan, all those elements you need to be successful. Psalm 37:4 says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart." Those desires aren't just random, but they're planted by God. But passion alone won't finish your journey. We need a map. We need a vision, a clear picture of where we're going. We need to have core values. These are the guardrails that keep us on course. And we have to have a strategic plan. This is the route, the milestones, and the next steps to advance. And as we go, we need a development plan. These are the habits, training, and mentors that grow us for the road ahead. At the center of it is our mission. These are who we serve and what we do each day. And done better over time, this is the vehicle that carries us to our vision fulfillment. Surrounding it all is our purpose. That's God's why. His purpose is bigger than any one of us. And when we stay in our lane, living and developing and advancing the mission and the calling He has given us, He aligns our steps. That's how ideas become impact, and the world needs what God has planted in us. Don't let it stay hidden. Go to successmap.org and get your personal free vision statement, and let's start mapping out our future today.